Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Our mission this week, well, it's to give you that complete situational awareness report on reality.
And we've got quite the stack of material to draw from, haven't we?
We really do. It spans pretty much everything, from the edge of the universe, drilling right down into geopolitical hotspots, and even, the future of coding.
Yeah, if you feel like the world's moving incredibly fast right now.
Which it does.
It absolutely does. From space weather shaking up the search for life to big shifts in U.S. politics, quantum computing leaps. Well, these stories start to explain why it feels that way.
Exactly. And this week's material, it seems defined by, well, volatility, acceleration.
I think that's right. We're looking at things like groundbreaking star observations that really challenge our basic ideas about where life could exist.
Right.
And then shifting straight to intense tech battles in Europe over AI and who owns what, intellectual property.
It's this mix, isn't it? Cutting-edge science, tricky governance, super fast tech changes. It's defining right now.
It is. And for you listening, this duck dive, it's pretty essential knowledge if you want to connect those dots. They might seem disparate, but they're not.
Absolutely. We're going to cover a huge range. Violent black hole births, even failures in UK child protection, sadly. But we always start big picture. Cosmos, big.
The biggest Kansas.
Okay, let's unpack this. We should start with what might be, well, frankly, one of the scariest astrophysics discoveries this year. So we have this huge story, unsettling really, about stellar violence. And it directly impacts how we search for life out there. Scientists have spotted a massive coronal mass ejection, a CME. But here's the kicker. It's 40 light years away.
Yeah, that's the first time we've definitively observed an event of this sheer magnitude outside our own solar system.
And this isn't just, some distant data point. It feels like a fundamental warning label slapped on the galaxy.
It really is a profound observation, paradigm shifting even. A coronal mass ejection, for anyone maybe not familiar, it's basically this enormous burst.
Right, like a solar flare, but way bigger.
Exactly. Superheated plasma, solar wind, intense magnetic fields just ripped away from the star's outer atmosphere, the corona.
Okay.
And the sources, including some good coverage in the Washington Post, they confirm this eruption, the one detected from that exoplanet system. It's powerful enough to strip the entire atmosphere off nearby planets.
Over time, presumably, not in one go.
Over time, yes, but consistently enough to render them completely uninhabitable. It just scours them clean.
Wow. So that completely changes how we define the habitable zone, doesn't it?
It fundamentally does. For decades, we've thought of that sweet spot as just the right distance for liquid water to potentially exist. Temperature, basically.
Okay, not too hot, not too cold. Goldilocks.
The Goldilocks zone, exactly.
Yeah.
But if the star itself is, violently throwing off these massive CMEs all the time...
Then having the right temperature means absolutely nothing.
Precisely. The planet could be completely scoured clean of its atmosphere, its gaseous envelope, leaving just a barren, lifeless rock behind, even if it's in that perfect temperature range.
So this one observation, it forces a huge shift in how scientists have to prioritize their search.
A massive shift, yes. It means they essentially have to move away from stars known for high levels of stellar activity.
Even if those stars seemed promising before. Like M-dwarfs.
Especially M-dwarfs. Those smaller, cooler stars, they were considered really promising targets. Why? Because they're incredibly common. They make up maybe 75% of the stars in the galaxy.
And they live for a really, really long time, right? Trillions of years sometimes.
Exactly. Much longer than stars like our sun. So the old thinking was, well, that longevity gives life more time to evolve. Plenty of time.
Makes sense.
But this new data suggests that stellar volatility, the star's own violent behavior, might just erase any life-supporting conditions long before evolution really gets a proper chance.
So the quiet neighbors are the better bet now.
It seems that way. Focus on quieter, more stable, stellar environments. The cosmos, it turns out, is empirically more hazardous, more dangerous to potential life than our previous calculations suggested.
And these CMEs, their effects aren't just theoretical for some planet light years away. We actually saw, or rather felt, the effects of one from our own sun very recently.
We did indeed. The sources noted a forecast just this week for another powerful CME, this one from our sun heading towards Earth.
Expected to arrive Wednesday evening, November 12th, right?
That was the forecast window, yes. And it's just a spectacular reminder of our own solar environment, how active it is.
So when these charged particles from the sun hit Earth's magnetic shield, the magnetosphere.
That's when you get the auroras. The interaction significantly enhances that auroral activity, the northern and southern lights.
And what stood out to me, I saw this reported in outlets like Yahoo and others, was just how far south the forecast reached this time.
It was remarkable. The northern lights were expected to be visible far, far outside their usual polar haunts, potentially visible as far south as Florida, Texas, and Colorado in the U.S.
Florida, that's incredible.
It really is. It's such a clear, beautiful example of space weather having a direct effect on us right here.
You could see the sky light up because of something that happened on the sun days ago.
And it's the same fundamental physics, isn't it? The physics that dictates whether a distant planet keeps its atmosphere is the same physics painting our skies with color.
That's the ultimate connection, macro and micro. Okay, speaking of revolutionary physics, let's pivot slightly. From violent stars to a really significant leap in quantum technology.
Right. This is fascinating stuff.
Researchers have managed to achieve quantum coherence times, that's the stability, right? Up to tens of milliseconds.
Which sounds tiny, but in the quantum world, it's an eternity.
How did they do it? The reports mention an innovative atom-by-atom approach using rare earth crystals.
Exactly. This is a huge breakthrough for quantum computing, yes, but maybe even more immediately for quantum communication. Coherence, that stability you mentioned, it's basically the holy grail in quantum mechanics.
It's the ability of a quantum state, like entangled particles, to maintain its properties, its relationship, over time, without falling apart.
Precisely. Previous systems often suffered from almost instant decoherence. The quantum information just collapsed in microseconds, sometimes even nanoseconds. It was incredibly fragile.
So when we talk about tens of milliseconds compared to microseconds,
Yeah.
what's the scale of that jump? How much more stable is that?
It's radical. Tens milliseconds represents a stability increase of maybe several hundred times, potentially more, compared to those older systems.
Okay.
And according to the research, I think it came from a University of Chicago team, this level of stability is actually enough. It's sufficient to transport quantum information across really vast distances without it losing those fragile quantum properties along the way.
Right. And what does vast distances mean in this context? How far are we talking?
We're talking about extending secure quantum links potentially 200 times farther than what was possible before.
Wow.
Which translates to enabling quantum communication over truly continental distances, maybe up to 2,000 kilometers or roughly 1,200 miles.
And crucially, without needing intermediate relay stations, like signal boosters.
Exactly. Without those repeaters, which are themselves complex and potential points of failure or vulnerability in classical systems, this moves us significantly closer to realizing the dream of a functional, secure quantum internet.
And that's where the real-world impact lies, isn't it? Because quantum communication promises security based not on complex math problems that might eventually be broken by future computers.
Like today's encryption.
Right. But based on the fundamental laws of physics themselves.
That's the key. Once you establish a quantum link, like sending entangled photons, any attempt by an eavesdropper to intercept or measure the quantum state instantly disturbs it. It collapses the state.
Alerting both the sender and the receiver that someone tried to listen in.
Immediately and unavoidably, it's inherently secure communication. Truly unhackable, at least in theory, across continents.
That could completely reshape secure data transmission, global finance, military communications, everything.
It secures the future backbone of global information exchange. It's moving the technology out of the pure physics lab and towards real-world, potentially commercial application. Still a ways to go, but a massive step.
Okay, still staying cosmic for a moment. Two more discoveries that are really challenging our existing models. First, this finding of an impossible black hole merger.
Ah, yes, this one caused quite a stir.
Two black holes merged, but they were exceptionally massive and spinning incredibly fast. And apparently, according to our current understanding, that specific combination just shouldn't happen.
That's the gist of it. This finding is profoundly disruptive to existing astrophysical models. What's fascinating and frankly confusing for theorists is that this merger seems to defy predictions based on how we thought massive stars evolve and die.
What specific rules did it break? Is it about their size, their spin, or the combination?
It's largely the combination, particularly the high spin rates for black holes of that specific mass. Our models for how binary star systems, two stars orbiting each other, evolve, shed mass, and eventually collapse into black holes. Well, they didn't easily allow for a pair like this to form, stay together, and then merge. It seems to violate constraints related to something called the mass gap and also theories about common envelope evolution.
Okay, so simplify that a bit. The mass gap is like a predicted range where black holes shouldn't exist.
Sort of. There was a predicted gap in the possible masses for black holes formed from stellar collapse, and these seem to fall within or challenge that range, especially given their high spins. And common envelope evolution describes a phase where two stars orbit inside a shared cloud of gas. How they interact during that phase influences their final masses and spins, and whether they remain close enough to eventually merge. This merger doesn't fit neatly into those scenarios.
So we've basically found something happening out there that doesn't fit the rules we've written down for how the universe works. It's like finding a square circle in geometry. You don't just adjust the drawing, you have to rethink the underlying axioms.
That's a good analogy. We have to rewrite or at least significantly revise the physics or the evolutionary pathways. It suggests our assumptions about how these massive binary stars live and die are incomplete.
Maybe there are other ways for black holes like this to form and merge.
Exactly. It raises possibilities of maybe more exotic formation channels.
Yeah.
Perhaps hierarchical mergers, smaller black holes merging first, then those resulting bigger ones merging again, happening in really dense environments like the cores of globular star clusters.
Sure.
It also opens up new avenues for understanding the gravitational waves these events produce. If these impossible mergers are actually more common than we thought, it could change our whole census of the black hole population across the universe. Lots of work for theorists ahead.
Definitely keeps them busy. Okay, finally in space. Let's end on a slightly more hopeful note, maybe. Approximate super-Earth, found just 20 light years away.
Relatively close in cosmic terms, yes.
And it's orbiting within its star's habitable zone. Tell us about this new neighbor.
So super-Earth, just to clarify, is a planet that's significantly more massive than Earth, but still quite a bit lighter than ice giants like Uranus or Neptune in our solar system. They're rocky or potentially ocean worlds.
And this one, being in the habitable zone, makes it particularly interesting.
Extremely interesting. Because it orbits within that region where temperatures could allow liquid water on the surface, assuming it has an atmosphere, it immediately becomes a prime candidate for follow-up observations.
Using powerful tools like the James Webb Space Telescope.
Precisely. JWST and future telescopes will target planets like this one for atmospheric analysis. They'll look for the chemical fingerprints of gases in its atmosphere, oxygen, methane, water vapor, potential biosignatures that could hint at life. Being only 20 light years away makes it much easier to study in detail compared to more distant candidates.
And what's the bigger picture here? What does finding another potentially habitable world relatively close by tell us?
What's really encouraging, and this was highlighted in places like Science Daily, is how this discovery reinforces the sheer statistical likelihood of planets like this existing. It's not just a lucky one-off.
Right, the numbers are staggering.
They are. Recent, fairly conservative estimates suggest that our Milky Way galaxy alone could contain over 11 billion, that's billion, with a bead Earth-sized planets located specifically within the habitable zones of their parent stars.
11 billion potential Earths. That number is almost too big to really comprehend.
It is, but the implication is crystal clear. Even if violent stars with CMEs, like we discussed, make many of those zones uninhabitable.
Or impossible black holes stir things up.
Right. Even accounting for all the cosmic hazards, the sheer number of potential candidates means the odds for life existing elsewhere remain, well, astronomical. The universe is clearly messy, it's violent, it's vast. But it also seems surprisingly fertile ground.
A lot of potential out there. Okay, let's bring the conversation firmly back down to Earth now. Specifically, let's talk about the people building the software that's rapidly reshaping our world, developers. And we absolutely have to talk about maybe the most bizarre but possibly insightful startup story this week. The rise of brain rot in coding.
Ah, yes, Chad. The brain rot IDE. Backed by Y Combinator, no less, which is a major Silicon Valley startup accelerator developed by Clad Labs.
Okay, so an IDE, an integrated development environment, that's the main software tool coders use to write and test their code.
Correct, it's their digital workbench.
But this one, it integrates things you'd normally try to block out. Gambling features, dating apps, social media feeds, right there, inside the coding window.
That's the concept. It sounds completely counterintuitive, almost like a parody. We joke about brain rot from too much TikTok or whatever.
Right, mindless scrolling.
But the founders, Kevin Lin and Richard Wang, they're actually premising this on the idea that incorporating these traditionally distracting elements might, somehow, enhance creativity and engagement for coders.
How on earth could that possibly work? Isn't the whole point of deep work, especially in complex fields like coding, to minimize distractions?
Well, it directly challenges that traditional work philosophy, the one that prizes those long, focused, almost monastic sessions of concentration.
The flow state.
Exactly. The brain rot IDE seems to tap into a different kind of behavioral science. Think gamification, intermittent reinforcement, dopamine hits.
So the theory is,
Mhm.
by giving the user scheduled or maybe triggered little bursts of high dopamine distraction within the work tool itself.
You actually prevent them from completely context switching away. Instead of opening a new browser tab for social media or picking up their phone, the distraction is right there integrated. The hope, I guess, is that it keeps them tethered to the primary task, maybe in a state of hyper-stimulated flux. Less deep focus, maybe, but more constant, albeit scattered, engagement.
I have to say, I'm deeply skeptical. Doesn't that just institutionalize bad habits? Rewarding distraction instead of focus.
And that is precisely the core criticism leveled against it. Many people in the tech world are worried it's essentially monetizing distraction, building a business model around things that fundamentally undermine the discipline needed for high-quality, complex software engineering.
Yeah.
They argue that context switching, even if it's made efficient by being inside the IDE, still carries a cognitive load. It still breaks concentration. Is the answer to our increasingly distractible world more integrated distraction? Or are we just maybe adapting work tools to a reality where sustained deep focus is becoming harder for many people to achieve?
It's a fascinating, if slightly terrifying question. I guess we'll see if it leads to more productivity or just really chaotic code bases and burnt out developers down the line.
Time will tell. Probably some very interesting bugs will emerge.
No doubt. Okay, speaking of code, accountability, and big implications, let's talk about a landmark legal ruling out of Germany. This one involves artificial intelligence, AI, and copyright law, and it could have global ripples.
This is a really significant legal precedent, yes. A court in Munich found that OpenAI, the company behind the very popular AI model ChatGPT.
Right, everyone knows ChatGPT.
They found OpenAI violated German copyright law, specifically by using song lyrics from a very famous German musician, Herbert Grönemeyer, in the data used to train their AI models. And critically, they did this without getting authorization or paying for it.
Okay, so they used copyrighted song lyrics as part of that massive ocean of text data they fed the AI.
Exactly. And this wasn't just a minor penalty like a slap on the wrist. The consequences are quite substantial.
What did the court order, and why is this such a big deal for the rest of Europe, potentially?
The court mandated that OpenAI has to pay damages to GEMA. GEMA is Germany's largest and frankly most powerful music rights organization. They collect royalties for millions of artists.
So real money involved.
Real money and a powerful plaintiff. But the bigger impact is the precedent. This ruling sets a major European benchmark for much stricter regulation and, crucially, accountability in how AI models are trained.
How so? What's the core legal principle here?
The court essentially rejected the idea that just because information is publicly available on the internet, AI companies have an automatic right to scrape it and use it for commercial training purposes without permission. They focused on the mass, unauthorized ingestion of copyrighted content.
So no fair use kind of defense for training data, at least not automatically in this context under German EU law.
It seems that way. The signal is clear. AI developers likely need to secure licenses or have a much stronger legal basis for the copyrighted material their models consume and learn from. You can't just vacuum up the entire internet's creative output for free to build your multi-billion-dollar model.
Wow. That potentially changes the entire economic foundation of these large language models, doesn't it?
It really could. If you think about it, every major AI developer, Google, Meta, Anthropic, all the big players, plus all the emerging models from China we'll talk about, they all rely on these enormous data sets, much of which is copyrighted material scraped without explicit licenses for training.
So this German ruling, if it influences broader EU policy or inspires similar lawsuits elsewhere,
it could force a radical and potentially immensely expensive shift for the entire industry. They might have to pivot towards using only licensed data or data explicitly in the public domain or develop new techniques. This could dramatically slow down the pace of AI development, at least in regions with strong copyright enforcement like Europe.
it forces the accountability upstream, right, into the training phase, not just worrying about whether the AI output infringes copyright.
Exactly. It shifts the burden. It puts the onus on the developers to prove they have the rights to the data they use to build their systems, potentially forcing them to retroactively or proactively pay for the intellectual property that formed the foundation of their AI's capabilities, a fundamental shift.
And the speed of that AI development, despite these potential legal hurdles, is just relentless. Look at Cursor. That's a startup focused on AI tools specifically for coding.
Right, an AI-assisted IDE in a way.
They just raised a massive funding round, $2.3 billion, which is stunning on its own, but it comes only 5 months after their previous big funding round.
The velocity of investment here is incredible. It just highlights how much money is pouring into AI, particularly tools aimed at automating or assisting software development itself.
And this new capital, it's reportedly earmarked to enhance their specific AI model called Composer. This ties into a trend that people are calling vibe coding.
Yeah, vibe coding. It's a term that's been popularized. I think computer scientist Andrei Karpathy used it. It refers to this practice of generating functional software not by writing detailed code line by line, but by giving the AI high-level plain language instructions.
So you just described the vibe or the general requirements of the software you want.
Essentially, yes. I need an app that does X, Y, and Z, make it look modern, connect to this database. You describe the desired outcome in natural language, and the AI attempts to generate the underlying code to achieve it.
That sounds like the ultimate dream of automation for some people. Just tell the computer what you want and it builds it.
Yeah.
But surely that incredible efficiency comes with some pretty significant trade-offs or risks.
Oh, absolutely. The risks are significant, and they generally fall into, let's say, 3 main categories.
Yeah.
Accountability, maintainability, and proficiency.
Okay, break those down. Accountability.
Who is ultimately responsible if the AI-generated code has security flaws? Or if it fails catastrophically in production? Is it the human developer who wrote the high-level prompt? Is it the company that created the AI model? The legal and ethical lines get very blurry very quickly.
Right. And maintainability.
Even experienced human developers often struggle to understand, debug, and modify large amounts of code that they didn't write themselves. Now imagine trying to maintain or extend a complex system mostly generated by an AI. It could become incredibly difficult, perhaps impossible, to manage over time. Legacy AI code could be a nightmare.
And the third one, proficiency. This
Yeah.
feels like the big one long term.
It could be. If developers increasingly rely on just describing the vibe and letting the AI handle the implementation details, what happens to their own fundamental coding skills? The ability to actually write complex algorithms, debug tricky problems, optimize performance from the ground up. Could that core proficiency erode over a generation of developers?
It's like relying solely on calculators for math. You might forget how to do long division. But this is for building the infrastructure of our digital world.
Exactly. It's potentially outsourcing the deep thinking, the architectural understanding that underpins robust software. And that's a societal concern that goes way beyond just the tech industry.
Okay, one more AI-related point here, but with a geopolitical angle. We're seeing a really interesting shift involving AI models coming out of China.
Yes, particularly open source models from China.
The sources are noting a kind of strategic pivot. These Chinese AI models are apparently getting really good at running effectively on older, less powerful computer chips.
That's the key insight. They're managing this partly to work around the strict export restrictions the United States has placed on sending the absolute latest, most powerful AI chips to China.
So necessity is the mother of invention. They're optimizing for the hardware they can get access to.
Precisely. And the result is that these Chinese open models are becoming significantly more affordable to run because they don't require the absolute bleeding edge, incredibly expensive hardware that some of the top Western models demand.
And this lower cost is actually translating into adoption, even by companies in the West.
That's what reports suggest. Major companies, even U.S.-based ones like Airbnb and the venture capital firm Social Capital, are reportedly experimenting with or adopting some of these Chinese OpenAI models. Why? Because they offer competitive performance for many tasks, but at a much lower operational cost.
That's fascinating. So the U.S. export controls aimed at slowing China's AI progress.
Might be inadvertently accelerating Chinese innovation in software optimization and efficiency on less advanced hardware. They're proving you don't necessarily need the absolute latest chip generation to achieve very high performance for a lot of common AI tasks.
Which could democratize access to powerful AI, but also shift the competitive landscape. If high-quality AI becomes much cheaper via these Chinese models, where does the U.S. maintain its edge?
Well, certainly at the absolute frontier of capability, running the most massive, complex models probably still requires the very latest hardware. And also, crucially, in highly regulated industries or applications where factors like trust, data privacy alignment, security vetting, and adherence to Western ethical guidelines are paramount. Companies in sensitive sectors might be wary of relying on models originating from a geopolitical rival, regardless of cost.
Right.
But for the huge global ecosystem of startups, researchers, and businesses that are more cost sensitive, China is rapidly positioning itself as a major, perhaps even the standard, supplier of powerful, affordable open AI models. It's a really dynamic situation.
Okay, let's wrap up the tech section with something a bit more tangible for consumers. Hardware. News from Valve, the company behind the Steam gaming platform.
Right, Valve's making some aggressive moves beyond just their software platform.
We've unveiled a new Steam machine. What's the angle here? Is it just another Steam Deck?
No, this seems to be a significant step up. Reports suggest the new Steam machine is potentially 6 times more powerful than their popular handheld Steam Deck.
6 times. Okay, so that puts it in a different category, more like a home console.
Exactly. It seems positioned as a hybrid device. Powerful enough to be a proper living room console, potentially rivaling Xbox or PlayStation in performance, but leveraging Steam's massive PC game library and maybe offering more customization like a PC. It's blurring that line between console convenience and PC flexibility.
Interesting play. And they also unveiled a VR headset.
Yes, the Steam Frame VR headset. What's notable here, besides presumably tight integration with Steam VR, is that it reportedly supports Android games as well.
Android games. So not just high-end PC VR titles, but potentially a huge library of mobile games too.
That seems to be the implication. It could significantly broaden the appeal and content library beyond the dedicated VR gamer, tapping into the enormous Android ecosystem. It's a multi-pronged strategy from Valve, pushing into both the high-performance console space and broadening VR accessibility.
A direct challenge to the established players on multiple fronts. Though, speaking of platforms and user experience, sometimes tech transitions don't go so smoothly. Like what happened recently with X, the platform formerly known as Twitter.
Ah, yes. The security key rollout. That caused quite a headache for many users.
Widespread frustration, right? People getting locked out of their accounts because of a flawed process for enrolling new security keys or passkeys.
Exactly. X was trying to enhance security, moving away from less secure methods like SMS-based two-factor authentication and pushing users towards more robust hardware keys or passkeys, which is generally a good security practice.
But the execution was the problem.
The execution seems to have been flawed, yes. Reports describe users getting stuck in loops, unable to properly register their new security methods, or finding their old methods disabled before the new ones were fully functional. It created significant confusion and locked many legitimate users out of their accounts, at least temporarily.
It's a tough balancing act. You want better security, but if the process to implement it is broken or overly confusing, you just end up frustrating or alienating your user base.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder that even vital security upgrades need really careful planning, clear communication, and above all, robust testing to ensure they actually work smoothly for the average user. Usability has to be paramount alongside the security itself.
All right, let's shift gears now. We're moving from the digital and quantum realms into the often messy, highly charged arena of global politics and diplomacy, starting right here in the United States with the end of that record-breaking government shutdown.
Yes, a long and disruptive period finally came to a close.
The sources confirm the House of Representatives did pass the necessary spending package. That officially ended the 43-day shutdown after President Donald Trump signed the bill into law.
It was certainly a relief for hundreds of thousands of federal workers and contractors who were furloughed or working without pay. But, and this is a big but, we need to look closely at how that resolution happened.
The vote count tells a story, doesn't it? 222 in favor, 209 against. That's incredibly narrow.
Extremely narrow. It passed essentially on a party line vote, maybe with a few exceptions. It signals very clearly that the deep underlying political and ideological divisions that caused the shutdown in the first place, they remain completely unresolved. This was a temporary fix, not a fundamental agreement.
And what's really fascinating here, and what's almost certainly going to shape the next big political battle, is what was left out of the deal, what didn't get resolved.
The absolute main sticking point, the issue that prevented a wider, more bipartisan, longer-term agreement, was the failure to address the Affordable Care Act Obamacare subsidies.
Specifically, the enhanced subsidies that were put in place during the COVID-19 pandemic to help more people afford health insurance.
Exactly. Those enhanced subsidies significantly lowered premiums for millions of people buying insurance on the ACA marketplaces. They're currently supporting coverage for an estimated 24 million Americans.
Okay, and the Republican position under President Trump's administration and in Congress was what?
The aim was largely to either significantly cut those subsidies or simply allow them to expire as scheduled, arguing they were fiscally unsustainable, temporary pandemic measures, and represented an overreach of government spending on entitlement programs.
And if they expire.
The direct consequence would be a massive spike in healthcare premiums for those 24 million people. Many would likely lose their coverage altogether because they couldn't afford the increase.
So that failure to agree on extending the subsidies becomes the next political flashpoint.
Immediately. And this is where the legislative maneuvering gets interesting. House Democrats, under the leadership of Congressman Hakeem Jeffries, almost instantly announced their next move.
Which is?
They plan to push for something called a discharge petition. Now, for listeners maybe not steeped in congressional procedure, this is a relatively rare but potentially very powerful tool.
How does it work?
Normally, the Speaker of the House controls what bills come to the floor for a vote. A discharge petition allows a simple majority of House members, currently 218 signatures, to force a specific bill out of its committee and directly onto the House floor for an immediate vote, even if the Speaker, in this case Republican Speaker Mike Johnson, opposes it and doesn't want that vote to happen.
So it bypasses the leadership's control of the agenda.
Correct. It's a way for a determined majority, even if it includes members from the minority party plus some defectors from the majority, to force action.
And Democrats are planning to use this to force a vote specifically on extending those Obamacare subsidies.
That's the plan. It's a classic political chess move. They're using this procedural tool to put Republicans in a very difficult position.
How so?
It forces every Republican member of the House to go on the record with a recorded vote on whether or not they support extending healthcare subsidies that directly benefit 24 million Americans. This is happening right as the political focus starts shifting towards the next election cycle. It's designed to highlight a key policy difference on a very sensitive issue.
What was the Republican counter-argument to this strategy?
The critique from the Republican side, as reported afterwards, was essentially that Democrats were playing politics with people's health care, that they were deliberately obstructing a fiscally responsible approach and using the subsidy issue as leverage, essentially holding the government hostage earlier and now using this petition to score political points rather than engaging in serious negotiation about health care costs and reform.
And the Democratic perspective.
From their viewpoint, the short-term deal to end the shutdown was completely inadequate because it kicked the can down the road on the most critical issue, preventing millions from losing affordable health care. They argue they had to use the discharge petition because the Republican leadership refused to allow a clean vote on the subsidies, setting the stage for another, potentially worse crisis when the temporary funding runs out again, likely in January.
It just underscores the intense level of legislative brinkmanship and partisan fighting that's defining Washington, D.C. right now. Very high stakes.
Extremely high stakes with real-world consequences for millions.
Okay, let's move south now to the Caribbean. Tensions seem to be escalating quite dramatically between the United States and Venezuela. Reports describe a dramatic show of force by the U.S. military.
Yes, this involves a significant and highly visible deployment of U.S. naval power near Venezuelan waters.
What kind of assets are we talking about?
We're talking about the USS Gerald R. Ford. That's the U.S. Navy's newest and largest aircraft carrier. It's been deployed to the Caribbean, along with its accompanying strike group typically includes cruisers, destroyers, submarines, and reports mention around 15,000 personnel involved in the overall operation.
That's a major deployment. What's the official reason given by the U.S.?
The official line from the Pentagon and the State Department is that this mission is focused on countering illicit narcotics trafficking in the region and generally ensuring maritime security and stability.
Given the history and the current political climate between the U.S. and Venezuela, analysts are questioning that that's the whole story, right?
Exactly. Foreign policy analysts, journals, commentators are actively debating the underlying intent. Is this purely about drug interdiction, or is this deployment this very visible show of force designed to send a strong message to the Venezuelan government under President Nicolas Maduro?
A message like what? Intimidation. Trying to pressure the Venezuelan military, perhaps, to consider removing Maduro from power or encouraging him to seek exile.
Those are certainly interpretations being discussed. Sending a carrier strike group, the pinnacle of U.S. conventional power projection, is rarely just about chasing drug smugglers. It's an unambiguous signal. It could be aimed at deterring Maduro, reassuring regional allies, signaling U.S. commitment, or indeed subtly encouraging internal dissent within Venezuela's armed forces. It's likely a multifaceted message.
And how did President Maduro and the Venezuelan government respond to this U.S. naval presence nearby?
The response from Caracas was immediate and equally dramatic in its own way. President Maduro ordered the mobilization of nearly 200,000 troops combining regular military reserves and militia forces.
200,000 troops. Wow.
Yes, and they launched extensive, highly publicized war drills and exercises across the country, specifically placing the military on high alert status along the coast and borders.
What was Maduro's stated rationale for this huge mobilization? Was he directly threatening the U.S. fleet?
Maduro vehemently rejected the U.S. narcotics trafficking justification. He publicly denounced the U.S. deployment as a provocation and a thinly veiled guise for potential U.S. intervention, possibly even an invasion attempt aimed at regime change and seizing Venezuela's oil reserves. That's the narrative he presented to his people and the world.
Did he make any specific threats about how Venezuela would respond if the U.S. did intervene?
Yes. He explicitly threatened that Venezuela would employ highly decentralized, asymmetric warfare tactics, essentially, guerrilla warfare, against any potential U.S. intervention force. This is a classic deterrence strategy for a weaker military power facing a stronger one, promised to make any invasion incredibly costly and protracted, a bloody quagmire.
So you have a U.S. carrier strike group conducting operations nearby, and Venezuela mobilizing hundreds of thousands of troops and threatening guerrilla war. This feels like a very dangerous standoff.
It absolutely is. It's a high-stakes game of geopolitical signaling and brinkmanship in a region already suffering from instability. The potential for miscalculation, an accidental clash, or a deliberate escalation is genuinely concerning. It raises serious questions about the effectiveness and risks of U.S. interventionist policies versus diplomacy in dealing with regimes like Maduro's.
A situation to watch very closely.
Oh.
Okay, let's shift our focus now across the Atlantic to Eastern Europe. Ukraine is facing a severe internal crisis alongside the ongoing war that could threaten its international support. A major corruption scandal.
Yes, this is a significant problem for Kyiv right now. Reports detail a large-scale corruption scandal allegedly involving around $100 million, primarily within the country's vital energy sector.
$100 million is a huge sum, especially for a country at war and heavily reliant on foreign aid. What were the immediate consequences?
The political fallout was swift. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky publicly called for the immediate dismissal of both his justice minister and his energy minister in connection with the investigation into this scandal.
That's a drastic move, sacking two key ministers. It suggests the evidence must be fairly compelling, or the political pressure intense.
It certainly signals the seriousness with which Zelensky's government, at least publicly, wants to be seen tackling the issue. But the damage, especially internationally, might already be begun.
How so? What's the international fallout?
Well, predictably, Russia is seizing on this scandal and amplifying it through its state media and diplomatic channels.
What's their angle?
Moscow claims, this proves what they've been saying all along, that Ukraine is systemically corrupt, that Western praise for Kyiv's supposed anti-corruption reforms over the years was naive or deliberately misleading, and that the government is fundamentally untrustworthy. It feeds directly into Russia's narrative justifying its actions.
Beyond the Russian propaganda aspect, what does this mean for Ukraine's actual relationship with its Western backers, particularly the European Union? They've poured billions into Ukraine.
It complicates things immensely. The EU, along with the US and international financial institutions like the IMF, International Monetary Fund, have repeatedly tied their financial and military aid packages to Ukraine, demonstrating concrete progress on implementing rigorous anti-corruption measures. Good governance has always been a key condition.
So a scandal of this scale, hitting the critical energy sector,
makes it incredibly difficult for the EU and other donors to simply look the other way. It raises awkward questions in donor capitals about where their taxpayers' money is going and whether oversight mechanisms are strong enough.
Could it actually jeopardize future aid packages?
It certainly could create delays, demand stricter conditions, or fuel political opposition within some EU member states who are already skeptical about the cost of supporting Ukraine long-term. The timing, as Ukraine braces for another difficult winter and needs continued, massive financial and military support, couldn't be worse. It potentially weakens Ukraine's hand at a critical moment.
And while Kiev is dealing with this internal crisis, we're also hearing Russia reiterate its core demands for ending the war. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov made some strong statements.
Yes, Lavrov stated quite unequivocally in recent remarks that what Moscow calls denazification remains an absolute non-negotiable precondition for any potential peace agreement with Ukraine.
Denazification. That term has been central to Russia's justification for the invasion from the beginning, but it's highly controversial and widely seen in the West as baseless propaganda. What specific examples did Lavrov cite this time to support that claim?
He specifically referenced recent reports and images circulating primarily in Russian media, but also some fringe Western sources, allegedly showing President Zelensky awarding state medals to Ukrainian soldiers who belong to units, like the Azov Regiment, that have historical or alleged contemporary associations with far-right nationalist groups or neo-Nazi ideology.
Azov has definitely been a focal point for these kinds of accusations, due to the controversial background of some of its founders and early members, although Ukraine insists it's been integrated into the regular armed forces and reformed.
Right, but Moscow continues to use Azov and any perceived links to far-right elements as Exhibit A in their argument that the Ukrainian state itself is fundamentally Nazified and poses a threat that must be eliminated. Lavrov's comments reaffirm that this ideological framing remains central to Russia's war aims, at least publicly.
It really highlights the immense, perhaps unbridgeable gap between the two sides' narratives and stated goals. If one side demands the fundamental political and ideological reshaping of the other as a precondition for peace,
Then the prospects for a negotiated diplomatic settlement seem incredibly remote. It suggests Russia is still aiming for objectives far beyond just territorial control.
Okay, let's move to another major international tension point: Iran and its nuclear program. The International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, is sounding the alarm again.
Yes. The IAEA, the UN's nuclear watchdog agency, has formally expressed serious concern and is demanding that Iran grant its inspectors access to key nuclear facilities. This access is described as long overdue.
Which specific sites are they most concerned about right now?
The primary focus mentioned is on the Fordo fuel enrichment plant and the Natanz enrichment facility. These are Iran's main sites where advanced centrifuges are used to enrich uranium.
And why the urgency now? Haven't inspections been an ongoing issue for years?
They have, but the context has changed. Iran significantly curtailed IAEA access and monitoring capabilities after the reimposition of international sanctions, particularly UN sanctions following recent regional conflicts where Iran or its proxies were involved. The IAEA hasn't had full, unfettered access to verify activities at these key sites since those conflicts escalated back in June.
And what's the tangible risk the IAEA is worried about regarding Iran's nuclear material itself?
The most serious concern centers on Iran's stockpile uranium enriched to 60% purity.
60%. How close is that to what's needed for a weapon?
It's worryingly close. Weapons-grade uranium is typically enriched to 90% or above. Getting from natural uranium up to 20% enrichment is the hardest part. Getting from 20% to 60% is easier, and the step from 60% to 90% is relatively quick, technically speaking. Iran has no credible civilian use for uranium enriched to 60%.
So the IAEA's concern is how much of the 60% material Iran now possesses.
Exactly. The agency notes that Iran's current stockpile of 60% enriched uranium is now estimated to be sufficient, if enriched further to weapons grade, to potentially produce the fissile material for around 10 nuclear weapons.
10 bombs worth of material. That's a significant number.
It is. While Iran continues to publicly insist its nuclear program is purely for peaceful energy purposes, amassing such a large stockpile of near-weapons-grade material, combined with the lack of transparency and inspector access at critical sites like Fordo and Natanz, is inevitably raising alarms across the international community. The breakout time, the time Iran would hypothetically need to produce enough weapons-grade material for one bomb, is shrinking.
A very tense situation with potentially global security implications. Finally, in this section, let's look at shifting security alliances in Asia. There's talk of expanding the IUKS Defense Pact.
Right. IUQ, the security pact currently involving Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, is actively considering a major expansion.
Who are they thinking of bringing into the fold?
The potential new members being seriously discussed are two key U.S. allies in the region, Japan and South Korea.
What would Japan and South Korea gain from joining? And what would the focus of an expanded IUKS be?
The primary focus, at least initially, appears to be on deepening military technological cooperation. This includes potentially collaborating on the development of advanced defense technologies and, most significantly, cooperating on nuclear-powered submarine capabilities.
Nuclear submarines. That's a big deal, especially for Japan.
It would be a huge step. Australia is already set to acquire nuclear-powered submarines under Pillar 1 of a UKIS with UK and US help. Bringing Japan and South Korea into aspects of this, perhaps under Pillar 2, which focuses on advanced capabilities like AI, cyber, and hypersonic missiles, or even exploring future submarine cooperation, would significantly bolster their long-range maritime capabilities.
What's driving this push for expansion? Why now?
The main driver is a shared perception of growing strategic threats in the Indo-Pacific region. Primarily, this means North Korea's accelerating nuclear missile program and China's rapid military modernization and increasing assertiveness, especially its naval expansion in the South China Sea and actions around Taiwan.
So it's about collective security and balancing against perceived threats.
Essentially, yes. Both Japan and South Korea see clear benefits in enhancing their own self-defense capabilities and deepening interoperability with the US, UK, and Australia through a formal structure like AUKUS. For Japan, participating in nuclear submarine development, even if just technologically initially, would mark a major evolution in its post-World War II defense posture, moving beyond its current fleet of highly capable but conventionally powered diesel-electric submarines. Nuclear boats offer much greater range and endurance.
How is China reacting to this potential expansion of AUKUS right on its doorstep?
Predictably, Beijing is watching this very closely and is not pleased. China views AUKUS, even in its current form, as an explicitly anti-China military alliance aimed at containing its rise. Expanding it to include Japan and South Korea would be seen as a further tightening of that perceived military encirclement.
Have they issued any specific warnings?
Yes. Relatedly, Beijing recently issued a very stern, direct warning specifically to Japan regarding the issue of Taiwan. This came after comments made by Japan's Prime Minister, Sanai Takaichi, which seemed to imply that Japan might consider military deployment or intervention if China were to take action against Taiwan.
What did China say in response?
The Chinese Foreign Ministry stated very clearly that any such Japanese military intervention in the Taiwan Strait would be considered an act of aggression against China, and vowed a robust response under international law. It underscores the extreme sensitivity around Taiwan and how quickly regional security dynamics could escalate. The potential expansion of AUKUS is definitely raising the diplomatic temperature in the Asia-Pacific.
A lot of moving pieces, a lot of tension points globally. Okay, let's shift perspective dramatically now. Take a deep breath maybe, and dive into deep history and the story of our planet itself, starting with a pretty monumental archaeological discovery about the sheer scale of the Roman Empire.
Yes, this is fascinating. It's a great example of how new technology is letting us see the past in much greater detail.
Scientists have been using digital mapping techniques, and they found evidence for an incredible amount of ancient Roman roads, far more than we previously knew existed.
That's right. By combining Geographic Information Systems (GIS) mapping with high-resolution satellite imagery and sometimes LiDAR data, which can see through vegetation.
LiDAR is the laser scanning, right?
Exactly. Using these tools, researchers have identified and mapped over 62,000 miles of previously unconfirmed or unknown Roman roads stretching across Europe and North Africa.
Wait, 62,000 additional miles? On top of what was already known?
That seems to be the implication of the latest reports. Previous estimates for the entire primary Roman road network were often cited around maybe 70,000 total miles. So finding evidence for another 62,000 miles nearly doubles our understanding of the sheer density and reach of their maintained infrastructure. It suggests the system was vastly more extensive than historical records alone indicated.
62,000 miles of engineered roads built 2,000 years ago. That scale is just hard to wrap your head around. What does this tell us about the Romans beyond just, being good road builders?
It fundamentally underscores the incredible logistical, organizational, and engineering prowess required to build and maintain an empire of that size for centuries.
They weren't just building them, they were keeping them up.
Exactly. These roads were the absolute arteries of the empire. They were critical, obviously, for moving legions quickly for military campaigns and control, but just as importantly, they enabled efficient tax collection, standardized communication through the state courier system, the cursus publicus.
Like a Roman Pony Express.
Sort of, yes. And crucially, the reliable flow of trade goods, grain from Egypt, wine from Gaul, olive oil from Spain, everything moved along these roads.
So the density of this newly revealed network gives us more insight into their economic and military strategies.
Yes. The reporting, I saw some in Popular Mechanics, mention how it enhances our understanding of regional economic integration and military logistics. It also gives us more data points to study their ingenious construction techniques, those famous layered roadbeds designed for drainage and incredible durability. Some of those techniques are still relevant for civil engineers today. It was a remarkable achievement of infrastructure.
Truly empire-building stuff.
Mhm.
Okay, let's shift from Roman roads to much, much older footprints, giving us a glimpse into the social lives of Neanderthals. New finds in Portugal.
Yes, at a place called Monte Clérigo Beach in Portugal. Archaeologists have uncovered Neanderthal footprints preserved in ancient sediment.
How old are these footprints?
They're dated to between 78,000 and 82,000 years ago, and what's really interesting is what they seem to reveal about Neanderthal behavior.
Because the old stereotype is the solitary, brutish caveman.
Right.
These footprints challenge that.
They absolutely challenge that simplistic stereotype. The analysis of the footprints, their size, the stride patterns, the grouping strongly suggests they weren't made by a lone individual.
Who do they think made them?
The evidence points towards a small social group, likely a family unit. Specifically, the interpretation suggests tracks from an adult male, possibly accompanied by 2 children, based on the different foot sizes.
A family? What were they doing there on the beach?
The context suggests they were engaged in systematic foraging or hunting along the ancient coastline. They were exploiting the resources available in that coastal environment.
So instead of just huddling in a cave, we're seeing potentially a family unit working together, cooperating, systematically using coastal resources like shellfish, or perhaps hunting marine birds or mammals.
Exactly. It paints a far more nuanced picture of Neanderthal life. It shows adaptability. They weren't just inland forest dwellers. They were comfortable and capable in diverse environments like coastlines. And it strongly implies social cooperation and perhaps even some level of planning in their foraging activities.
Closer to the kind of complex social behavior we usually associate with early modern humans, Homo sapiens.
Much closer. It reinforces the growing body of evidence that Neanderthals lived in small, cooperative, likely kin-based groups and possessed a significant degree of behavioral flexibility and social complexity. They weren't just primitive brutes waiting to be replaced. They were a successful, adaptable hominin species for hundreds of thousands of years.
Fascinating. Okay, now let's look at how scientists are reading Earth's own history, using some really incredible, almost sci-fi techniques. First, using actual space dust found in Arctic ice.
Yeah, this is a really novel approach to paleoclimatology studying past climates. Researchers are analyzing cosmic dust particles that contain a specific isotope of helium, helium-3.
Helium-3, where does that come from?
Helium-3 is a very rare, non-radioactive isotope of helium. Most of it found on Earth is actually delivered from space, primarily carried by the solar wind and embedded in tiny micrometeorites or cosmic dust particles that constantly rain down on our planet.
Okay, so space dust carrying helium-3 lands on Earth. How does that help figure out past climates in the Arctic?
This helium-3 accumulates over long periods in deep-sea sediments on the ocean floor. And crucially for this study, it also gets trapped in layers of ice, like in Arctic ice cores. The key mechanism they're using relates to sea ice coverage.
How does sea ice affect the dust?
When the Arctic Ocean is covered by extensive sea ice, that ice acts like a lid, preventing the cosmic dust falling from the atmosphere from settling directly onto the ocean floor below. The dust gets trapped on or within the ice instead, or gets deposited only in areas of open water, polynyas.
So the amount of helium-3 found in sediment layers on the seabed can tell you how much open water there was versus ice cover.
Precisely. By drilling sediment cores from the Arctic seabed and analyzing the concentration, or rather the rate of accumulation, of helium-3 in different layers corresponding to different time periods, in this case going back about 30,000 years.
They can reconstruct how much sea ice was present in that region at that time. Less helium-3 in the sediment means more ice cover, blocking its deposition.
Exactly. It provides a proxy measurement for past sea ice extent. And this is incredibly valuable information. Why? Because understanding the natural cycles of Arctic sea ice over millennia helps us understand the historical dynamics of the entire Arctic ecosystem.
How does sea ice relate to the ecosystem?
Sea ice extent directly controls things like primary biological productivity, the blooms of phytoplankton, the tiny marine plants that form the absolute base of the marine food web. Knowing the past helps predict the future. Understanding how the ecosystem responded to past changes in sea ice helps us model how the current rapid melting of Arctic sea ice, largely driven by human-caused climate change, will likely impact marine life, fisheries, and the entire Arctic environment in the coming decades.
Using literal space dust to predict the future of Arctic ecosystems. Okay, one more piece of paleoclimate detective work, this time using a common plant, the horsetail.
Yes, the humble horsetail plant, which has ancient relatives going back hundreds of millions of years, scientists are using the chemistry of modern horsetails to decode past climate patterns.
How does a horsetail record climate history?
It's related to water and oxygen isotopes. Water contains different isotopes or atomic variations of oxygen, like oxygen-16 and oxygen-18. The ratio of these isotopes in rainwater and groundwater changes depending on climate conditions like temperature and humidity.
Okay, and plants absorb this water.
Right. Horsetails absorb water through their roots, and that water moves up through the stem to the tips. What scientists did was meticulously analyze the oxygen isotope ratios in the water found within different parts of the horsetail plant, from the base up through the segments of the stem to the very tip.
And they found differences.
They found subtle but measurable discrepancies in the isotope ratios along the length of the plant. These variations, it turns out, are directly related to the isotopic composition of the source water the plant used, and also to processes like evaporation occurring within the plant itself. These processes are influenced by the surrounding climate.
So by understanding these isotopic shifts within the living plant,
They can develop a model, sort of calibration. This model allows them to then look at fossilized horsetail plants from the past and analyze their preserved oxygen isotope ratios. By applying the model, they can reconstruct the isotopic composition of the water those ancient plants were using.
which in turn tells them about the climate temperature, rainfall patterns, humidity of that specific location thousands or even millions of years ago.
Exactly. It provides a new, potentially very precise and geographically localized proxy for understanding Earth's past hydrological cycle, how water moved through the environment in ancient times.
So instead of relying only on large-scale records like ice cores or maybe broader patterns from tree rings, this gives a more detailed ground-level view of past local climates.
That's the potential. It connects modern plant biology directly to the deep climate history recorded in the fossil record. It offers another valuable tool for generating more detailed paleoclimate models, helping us understand how specific regions responded to past climate changes, like shifts in drought frequency or monsoon intensity thousands or millions of years ago. It adds another piece to the puzzle of Earth's complex climate history.
We need to transition now, and it's a difficult but necessary shift, to some ongoing, incredibly urgent global humanitarian crises and issues of social justice that were detailed in the source material this week, starting with the devastating situation in Sudan.
Yes, the United Nations has issued a stark warning. The ongoing conflict there between the Sudanese Armed Forces, SAF, and the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, RSF, has now created the world's largest internal displacement crisis.
The largest in the world. How many people are affected?
The estimates are staggering. Over 10 million people have been forcibly displaced by the fighting. This includes those displaced internally within Sudan, fleeing from conflict zones, and also those who have managed to flee across borders into neighboring countries, which are often ill-equipped to handle such large influxes.
10 million people. The scale is almost unimaginable.
Yeah.
What are the conditions like for those displaced?
They are described as dire. Access to food, clean water, shelter, and especially medical care is severely curtailed, particularly in active conflict zones like the Darfur region. Specifically, North Darfur is mentioned as being cut off. Humanitarian aid delivery is extremely difficult and dangerous.
Is there international action being taken?
The UN is urgently appealing for more international funding and support. The United States government has also voiced strong concerns, urging immediate action from the international community to prevent the situation from escalating into potential genocide, given the ethnic dimensions of some of the violence, particularly in Darfur. But the reality is, the humanitarian response is struggling to keep up with the sheer scale of the need. It's a catastrophic situation that has spiraled dramatically since the conflict erupted.
And Sudan's crisis is unfolding against a backdrop of a wider, worsening global food emergency, isn't it?
Yes, unfortunately. The Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN, the FAO, and the World Food Program, WFP, the two main UN agencies dealing with food security, issued a joint warning recently. They stated that acute food insecurity, meaning people facing severe hunger, potentially starvation, is set to worsen significantly in 16 specific countries or regions around the world.
16 hotspots. Which areas are considered at the highest risk of famine or catastrophic hunger right now?
The report specifically highlights several countries as being at the absolute highest risk level. These include Sudan, obviously, given the conflict, also Palestine, particularly Gaza due to the ongoing conflict and blockade, Mali in West Africa also suffering from conflict and instability, Haiti in the Caribbean facing gang violence and economic collapse, and Yemen still grappling with the consequences of its long civil war. These are places where famine is considered a real possibility if conditions don't improve rapidly.
What are the main drivers of this worsening global hunger? Is it just conflict?
Conflict remains the overwhelming primary driver, according to the FAO-WFP report. War disrupts food production, destroys infrastructure, blocks trade routes, and displaces populations, leading directly to hunger. But it's not the only factor. Climate shocks, droughts, floods, extreme weather are increasingly exacerbating the situation, destroying crops and livelihoods. And persistent economic instability, high food prices, and inflation in many vulnerable countries are also pushing millions more into acute hunger.
A devastating combination of factors.
It is, and as the WFP leadership emphasized, famine is not inevitable, even in these high-risk countries. It's preventable. But preventing it requires immediate, large-scale political action to resolve conflicts, ensure humanitarian access, and provide the necessary resources to avert widespread disaster. Children are always the most vulnerable, facing potentially irreversible physical and cognitive damage from severe malnutrition.
A truly grim picture globally. Now, we have to turn to some deeply troubling reports concerning specific human rights violations. And I think we need to pause here, just acknowledge the gravity of what's being alleged in these reports. The first concerns deportations involving both the United States and El Salvador.
Yes, this involves a specific and damning investigative report published jointly by Human Rights Watch, HRW, a major international rights organization, and Cristosal, a respected human rights group working in Central America. The report is titled, "You Have Arrived in Hell."
You have arrived in hell. That title alone is chilling. What does the report allege?
It details severe and systematic human rights abuses allegedly suffered by Venezuelan migrants and asylum seekers after they were deported by the United States to El Salvador. Specifically, it focuses on their detention in El Salvador's notorious new mega prison, the Center for Terrorism Confinement, known by its Spanish acronym CECOT.
CECOT, that's the huge prison complex built under President Nayib Bukele's crackdown on gangs, right? Meant for suspected gang members.
Exactly. But this report focuses on 252 Venezuelan deportees who were sent there between March and April of 2025. And critically, HRW states that many of these individuals were flagged by U.S. immigration authorities as having no known criminal history or gang affiliation. They were simply migrants or asylum seekers deported from the U.S.
So non-criminals being sent to a maximum security prison designed for terrorists and gang members, what happened to them inside CECOT, according to the report?
The allegations documented by HRW and Cristosal are horrific. They include widespread and systematic abuse, routine beatings by guards, severe overcrowding, denial of adequate food and water, lack of medical care, and credible accounts of torture and sexual violence.
Sexual violence against deportees.
Yes. The report details specific accounts, including claims that sexual assaults were sometimes used as retaliation against detainees who attempted to complain about conditions or speak to visiting representatives from organizations like the International Red Cross.
This is horrifying. What's the connection back to the United States beyond the initial deportation?
The report strongly criticizes the fact that the U.S. government, specifically the Trump administration, had provided significant funding, millions of dollars, to El Salvador to support its security measures, including measures related to detaining migrants and managing prisons like CECOT.
So U.S. funds may have supported the facility where these abuses were allegedly occurring.
That's the implication HRW draws. The report argues that the U.S. bears responsibility for deporting these individuals to a situation where they faced a high risk of torture and abuse, potentially violating international laws like the UN Convention Against Torture, which prohibits returning people to countries where they face such dangers, the principle of non-refoulement. It raises profound ethical and legal questions about U.S. deportation policies and partnerships with countries with poor human rights records, especially concerning prison conditions.
A deeply disturbing report that demands serious attention and investigation. The second major allegation we need to discuss relates to the conflict in Gaza and the alleged use of human shields.
Yes, another very serious allegation. A recent report citing information from former U.S. officials claims that the United States government had received prior intelligence or information indicating that some Israeli military officials had discussed or were potentially implementing practices that could constitute the use of Palestinian civilians as human shields during military operations in Gaza.
Using civilians as human shields is a clear violation of international humanitarian law, a war crime. What specific practices were alleged?
The sources suggest the evidence shared with the White House involved specific incidents where Israeli soldiers allegedly directed or compelled Palestinian civilians, sometimes under duress, to enter buildings or tunnels first, ahead of the soldiers, particularly locations suspected of being booby-trapped with explosives by militants.
So, forcing civilians to check for danger.
That's the nature of the allegation. It's crucial to state that the Israeli military, the IDF, has vehemently and consistently denied these allegations. They maintain they adhere to international law and take precautions to avoid civilian casualties, blaming Hamas for embedding itself within civilian populations.
But these allegations are being taken seriously. Are they being investigated?
Yes. The report notes that these claims, supported by testimonies gathered from several Palestinians, are currently under formal scrutiny by international bodies, specifically mentioning the United Nations Committee Against Torture. So this isn't just speculation, it's part of an ongoing process examining potential breaches of the laws of war by independent international experts. It underscores the intense scrutiny and the complexity of verifying actions in the fog of war, but the allegations themselves are extremely grave.
Absolutely. And this theme, the potential decay of moral boundaries and conflict, is amplified by another investigation, this one launched in Italy, concerning something utterly horrifying termed sniper tourism.
Yes, this is a truly disturbing story. Italian prosecutors have opened an investigation into allegations related to the Bosnian War in the 1990s, specifically during the brutal years-long siege of Sarajevo.
Sarajevo was besieged by Bosnian Serb forces who controlled the hills surrounding the city, subjecting civilians to constant shelling and sniper fire for years. What is sniper tourism in this context?
The term refers to sickening allegations that foreign nationals, potentially including some Italians, hence the investigation there allegedly traveled to the Bosnian Serb positions overlooking Sarajevo during the siege. And they reportedly paid significant sums of money.
Paid money for what?
Paid money for the opportunity to use sniper rifles to shoot at unarmed, unsuspecting civilians trapped inside the besieged city. Essentially, paying for the thrill of killing innocent people as a form of dark, depraved tourism.
The moral depravity is staggering. To treat a horrific war crime, the deliberate targeting of civilians during a siege, as some kind of twisted adventure holiday.
It almost defies comprehension. The moral outrage is immense. It speaks to a profound desensitization to violence and human suffering.
What can the Italian investigation realistically achieve now, decades later?
It faces significant challenges, obviously, gathering evidence from a conflict zone decades ago. But legally and ethically, it's incredibly important. The investigation will examine whether such actions occurred, who was involved, and whether these foreign civilians could potentially be prosecuted, perhaps under universal jurisdiction principles for war crimes, even though they weren't soldiers.
Prosecuting private citizens for war crimes committed in a foreign conflict.
It's legally complex, but potentially possible, depending on the evidence and the specific laws. Even if prosecutions prove difficult, the investigation itself sends a crucial message about accountability. It highlights the need to confront the horrifying reality that even private individuals can become perpetrators in conflict zones, and raises fundamental questions about how the international community can prevent and punish such atrocities and address the underlying desensitization that allows them to happen.
A chilling reminder of the depths human behavior can sink to in wartime. Finally, in this section, we turn to the United Kingdom and a tragic case involving severe failures in child protection services. The official review into the murder of a young girl, Sarah Sharif.
Yes, a deeply tragic case. The serious case review into the circumstances surrounding Sarah Sharif's death revealed major systemic failures by the agencies responsible for her welfare.
What were the key findings? What went wrong?
The review highlighted multiple critical lapses. There were significant failures in communication and coordination between different agencies involved: social services, police, schools. Information wasn't shared effectively. Concerns weren't always followed up properly.
And the most devastating failure mentioned?
The most critical and almost unbelievable finding was that council officials, social workers, who were supposed to conduct a welfare check on Sarah due to concerns raised about her safety, they actually visited the wrong address. They went to the wrong house just one day before she was found murdered.
They went to the wrong home. That's an unthinkable error in a child protection case.
A catastrophic error. The review also noted, controversially, that factors related to race and potentially cultural biases might have played a role. It suggested these factors may have hindered the effective reporting of abuse concerns by members of the community or professionals, or perhaps influenced how seriously those concerns were initially treated.
So a combination of systemic breakdown, communication failure, potentially bias, and ultimately a fatal error.
Yes. The case serves as a grim and urgent reminder of the desperate need for fundamental reform and much more rigorous oversight and interagency collaboration within the UK's child protection system. The goal is obviously to prevent such systemic failures from leading to another preventable tragedy like Sarah Sharif's death.
Okay, let's move into the realm of health now. And we actually have some genuinely exciting, positive news to start with on the cancer front. A new smart drug that sounds like it could be a really revolutionary step forward in precision medicine.
It really does sound promising. Researchers have developed a novel type of drug, described as a smart drug, that works in a very clever way. It targets a specific hidden structural weakness found in the RNA molecules of cancer cells.
RNA, not DNA. What's his weak point?
It's described as a unique, complex folding pattern within the RNA molecule. This specific folded structure is apparently absolutely essential for the cancer cell's survival and proliferation. The smart drug is designed to recognize and bind specifically to this unique RNA fold.
And what happens when the drug binds to that RNA weak spot?
According to the preclinical studies, so this is still in the lab phase, not yet in human trials, when the drug hits this target, it disrupts the RNA's function so severely that it triggers the cancer cell's own self-destruct program, a process called apoptosis. The cancer cell essentially kills itself.
Wow. So it's not like chemo that just poisons rapidly dividing cells. This actually targets a specific molecular structure unique to the cancer cell and makes it self-destruct.
That's the key difference and the potential power of this approach, because that specific RNA folding pattern is supposedly unique to the cancer cells, or at least much more prevalent there. The drug should, in theory, leave healthy, normal cells largely unharmed.
Which means far fewer side effects.
Exactly. It represents a fundamental shift towards truly targeted therapy, moving away from the often brutal systemic effects of traditional chemotherapy or radiation, which cause so much collateral damage to healthy tissues.
Minimizing side effects like hair loss, nausea, immune suppression.
Potentially, yes. If this approach proves successful as it moves into clinical trials in humans, it could transform treatment protocols, especially for cancers that are currently very difficult to treat or have become resistant to existing therapies. It's a really elegant example of precision medicine at the molecular level.
Definitely something to watch with hope. Okay, now shifting to the other end of the health spectrum, from potential cures to emerging risks. There's alarming new research linking a very popular habit, vaping, to a major chronic disease.
Yes, this study raises serious concerns about the long-term health impacts of e-cigarettes. It found a significant statistical link between vaping using electronic cigarettes and an increased risk of developing prediabetes and eventually full-blown type 2 diabetes.
And this applies to people who only vape, not just those who smoke traditional cigarettes as well.
The study found the increased risk applied to people who vaped exclusively and also to those who engaged in dual use, meaning they both vaped and smoked traditional cigarettes. Both groups showed a higher likelihood of developing insulin resistance compared to non-users.
Insulin resistance, that's the precursor to diabetes, where your body doesn't respond properly to the insulin it produces. What's the proposed mechanism? How might vaping cause this?
The study suggests that chemical compounds found in the aerosol vapor produced by e-cigarettes are the likely culprits. These chemicals, when inhaled, appear to interfere with the body's normal metabolic processes, specifically leading to or worsening insulin resistance over time. It's not just harmless water vapor.
And importantly, the study found the risk wasn't evenly distributed across the population, did it?
No, and this is a critical public health finding. The research highlighted a significantly higher risk of developing vaping-associated prediabetes or diabetes among certain demographic groups. Specifically, Hispanic individuals, Black individuals, and people from lower-income backgrounds showed a heightened vulnerability.
Why might that be? Differences in vaping product use, underlying health disparities, targeted marketing?
The study likely didn't pinpoint the exact reasons for the disparities, but those are all plausible contributing factors. What's crucial is the message this sends. It directly confronts the still pervasive and dangerous marketing narrative or public perception that e-cigarettes are a safe or harmless alternative to smoking.
Clearly not, if they're linked to a major metabolic disease like diabetes.
Exactly. The evidence is mounting that the chronic inhalation of these chemicals is causing significant metabolic dysfunction. This is a rapidly growing public health concern, especially given the popularity of vaping among young people. It really demands stricter regulation of vaping products, more public health campaigns highlighting the risks, and increased resources for cessation programs, particularly targeted towards those communities identified as being at higher risk.
A really important warning sign. Okay, let's transition now into a topic that many people find difficult to talk about, but it affects everyone eventually. End-of-life care and grieving. There were some insightful reflections shared by a longtime hospice nurse.
Yes, Kath Murray, a hospice nurse with extensive experience, her insights really challenged some common assumptions and fears about the dying process.
What was her main message? That it's not all doom and gloom?
Essentially, yes. She emphasized that while sadness and grief are obviously present, end-of-life care is often far from being perpetually grim or depressing. She spoke about witnessing profound moments of connection, reflection, joy, peace, and even shared laughter among patients and their families during their final days or weeks. It's a much more complex emotional landscape than people often imagine.
That's actually quite comforting to hear. Did she offer any specific advice based on her observations? Things people often get wrong when facing death or supporting someone who is dying?
She did. She highlighted 3 common yet largely avoidable mistakes that people frequently make during the grieving process or when accompanying a loved one at the end of life.
Okay, what are these 3 common mistakes?
The first mistake, she noted, is the failure to discuss death openly. Trying to protect the dying person or oneself by pretending the end isn't approaching. This avoidance often leads to missed opportunities for important conversations, unresolved emotions, and regrets later on.
So honest communication is key, even when it's difficult. What's the second mistake?
Underestimating the profound importance of reminiscing. She stressed how vital it is for both the dying person and their loved ones to share stories, look at old photographs, listen to meaningful music, and recount memories together. This process helps affirm the value and meaning of the person's life, providing dignity, comfort, and a sense of closure as life concludes. People often shy away from it, thinking it might be painful, but she found it usually brings great comfort.
That makes a lot of sense. And the third common mistake?
Neglecting personal self-care while being a caregiver. Family members and friends often pour all their energy into caring for their dying loved one, completely neglecting their own physical and emotional needs. This inevitably leads to exhaustion, burnout, and can actually compound the trauma and difficulty of their own grief journey after the person has passed. Taking breaks, accepting help, and tending to one's own well-being isn't selfish. It's essential for sustainable, compassionate caregiving.
Really valuable, practical wisdom born from experience, things we can all keep in mind. Okay, finally in health, let's revisit the ongoing challenge of long COVID. There's been a potential breakthrough in understanding what might be happening physically in people suffering from this debilitating condition.
Yes, this could be a significant step forward. Researchers have discovered unusual microscopic structures present in the blood of many patients suffering from long COVID.
What are these structures?
They're described as dense, persistent microclots. But they're not just ordinary blood clots. They are found intricately entwined with mesh-like structures produced by the immune system, known as NETs, which stands for neutrophil extracellular traps.
Okay, NETs, neutrophil extracellular traps. What are those normally?
NETs are part of our immune defense. Neutrophils are a type of white blood cell, a first responder to infection. When they encounter pathogens like bacteria or viruses, they can undergo a process called mitosis, where they essentially spew out a sticky web or mesh made of their own DNA, proteins, and antimicrobial agents.
To trap and kill the invaders.
Exactly. It's a way to contain the infection. However, in some diseases, this mitosis process can become excessive or dysregulated.
And in long COVID patients, they're finding these nets tangled up with microclots. What's the significance of that entanglement?
The finding is that in long COVID patients, these net-entangled microclots are reportedly more frequent, larger, and more resistant to being broken down by the body's natural clot-dissolving mechanisms compared to what's seen in healthy individuals, or even those recovering normally from acute COVID-19.
So these persistent net-wrap microclots could be blocking blood flow.
That's the hypothesis. The presence of these abnormal microclots suggests an ongoing state of inflammation and microvascular clotting, tiny clots forming in the smallest blood vessels, the capillaries. This could impair blood flow and oxygen delivery to tissues throughout the body.
Which could potentially explain some of the diverse and debilitating symptoms of long COVID, like the profound fatigue, the brain fog, muscle pain, shortness of breath.
It provides a plausible biological mechanism that could underpin many of those symptoms, yes. If oxygen isn't getting to your brain, muscles, and organs efficiently due to these microclots, it would certainly explain fatigue and cognitive dysfunction.
And this finding is huge because long COVID has been so difficult to diagnose objectively.
Right.
It affects a significant number of people, estimates range, but maybe 6 to 7% of adults globally who had COVID, yet there hasn't been a clear diagnostic test.
Exactly. For many patients, it's been a diagnosis based purely on symptoms, often leading to frustration and disbelief. The discovery that these specific net-entangled microclots are consistently found at higher levels in affected individuals provides a potential verifiable biomarker.
A measurable sign in the blood.
Yes. This is a crucial step. It could lead to the development of objective diagnostic tests for long COVID. And perhaps even more importantly, if these microclots and nets are indeed central to the pathology, it opens the door to developing targeted treatments. Perhaps therapies aimed at breaking down these specific clots or modulating the excessive net production. It offers real hope for understanding and eventually treating this condition.
This is a very positive development.
Mm-hmm.
We have one more health finding, and this one is really mind-bending. It's about hidden immune cells discovered in the brain that might actively control our anxiety levels.
This is genuinely paradigm-shifting research in neuroscience and mental health. Traditionally, we think about anxiety and mood disorders almost exclusively in terms of neurons, brain cells, and the balance of chemical messengers between them, the neurotransmitters like serotonin or dopamine.
Right, the chemical imbalance theory.
Exactly. But this new research suggests that the brain's own resident immune cells called microglia, play a much more active and direct role in actually modulating anxiety-related behaviors than we previously realized.
Microglia. They're usually thought of as just the brain's cleanup crew or defense system against infection, right?
So that was the traditional view, yes. They clean up cellular debris, fight off pathogens that might enter the brain. But this research indicates they do much more. They seem to be constantly monitoring neuronal activity and can actively influence it.
So anxiety might not just be faulty wiring between neurons. It could actually involve an imbalance in the brain's own internal immune army.
That appears to be the implication. Scientists found evidence, initially in animal models, suggesting there are actually distinct subtypes of microglia within the brain. And remarkably, these subtypes seem to have opposing effects on anxiety.
Opposing effects? How so?
One type of microglia, when activated, appears to promote anxiety-like behaviors. The other distinct type seems to actively alleviate or reduce anxiety. It's like having pro-anxiety and anti-anxiety immune cells operating within the brain tissue itself.
That's incredible. So feeling anxious might be related to which type of microglia is more dominant or active at a given time.
Precisely. The hypothesis is that under conditions of chronic stress, for example, the balance between these two microglial populations might shift. The pro-anxiety microglia could become overactive, or the anti-anxiety ones might become suppressed, leading to a state of heightened anxiety.
This completely reframes how we might think about treating anxiety disorders.
It absolutely does. It suggests that anxiety isn't just a chemical imbalance in neurotransmitters, but potentially also an immune imbalance within the brain itself, an imbalance in the ratio and activity state of these different microglial subtypes.
Could this lead to entirely new kinds of treatments?
That's the exciting possibility. It opens the door for developing completely novel therapeutic strategies. Instead of only targeting neuronal communication with traditional drugs like SSRIs, perhaps future treatments could focus on modulating the brain's immune response specifically, finding ways to selectively boost the activity of the anti-anxiety microglia or dampen the pro-anxiety ones. It's a whole new frontier for psychiatric medicine.
Okay, let's shift gears one last time into the world of business, culture, and sports, starting with a really significant financial commitment in the automotive sector. Toyota is making a big push into electric vehicles, EVs, in the United States.
Yes, this marks a major strategic move for Toyota.
Yeah.
They've just officially inaugurated their large new battery manufacturing plant in North Carolina.
A battery plant specifically for EVs, right? Because Toyota was famously focused on hybrid technology for a long time.
Exactly. They were pioneers in hybrids, but perhaps a bit slower than some rivals to fully embrace pure battery electric vehicles. This new plant signals a definitive shift. And crucially, alongside the plant opening, Toyota confirmed they're making an additional $10 billion investment in their future mobility initiatives, specifically within the U.S.
$10 billion. That's a huge commitment. What does it cover? More EVs, jobs.
It seems to cover continued investment in EV production capacity, related technologies, and associated job creation in the U.S. It's a clear signal that Toyota is now fully committed to building a domestic supply chain for EV batteries and competing aggressively in the rapidly growing American EV market. It solidifies their position alongside other major automakers who are also investing heavily in electrification.
A big move from a global giant. Meanwhile, in the world of fashion and direct-to-consumer brands, Kim Kardashian's shapewear company, Skims, continues its absolutely meteoric rise. It's hit a new, quite frankly, staggering valuation.
It's pretty remarkable. Skims has just achieved a valuation of $5 billion. That's a billion with a B.
$5 billion. For a shapewear and apparel brand, how did it reach that number?
This new valuation comes after closing another successful funding round. And the specific goal of this new capital injection is reportedly to accelerate the expansion of Skims' physical retail presence, opening more brick-and-mortar stores.
So they're moving beyond just online sales, but $5 billion. How does that compare to other established brands?
That valuation now officially surpasses the market capitalization of many well-known, established legacy brands in the fashion, apparel, and even footwear sectors. The report specifically mentioned it's now valued higher than a giant like Crocs, for example.
Wow.
It just powerfully underscores the immense financial potential of celebrity-driven brands when combined with very effective digital marketing and a strong direct-to-consumer business model in today's retail landscape. Skims has clearly tapped into something significant in terms of product appeal and branding.
It's certainly a phenomenon. But speaking of retail competition, not everyone is happy about the flood of low-cost goods coming from overseas e-commerce platforms.
Yeah.
Europe seems to be getting more aggressive in trying to protect its domestic industries.
Yes, particularly in the fashion sector. Italy is taking a leading role here. The Italian government is planning to introduce a substantial new tax, specifically targeting low-value postal packages arriving from countries outside the European Union.
Low-value packages, like the ones from platforms such as Shein or Temu.
Precisely. Those platforms have absolutely inundated the European market with extremely low-priced clothing and other goods, often shipped directly to consumers in small packages that currently benefit from certain tax exemptions or minimal duties.
And Italy wants to put a stop to that. Why Italy in particular?
Italy has a historically vital domestic fashion and textile industry, ranging from high-end luxury brands to smaller manufacturers. They see the flood of ultra-cheap imports from platforms like Shein and Temu as direct and often unfair competition that threatens local businesses and jobs. This new tax is designed to level the playing field somewhat by increasing the cost of those imports.
Is this just an Italian initiative or part of a bigger trend?
It reflects a broader push happening across the European Union. The EU as a whole is moving towards eliminating the existing value-added tax, VAT exemption, for low-value imported goods, likely by early 2026. The goal is both to capture more tax revenue and to protect European businesses from competitors who benefit from these tax loopholes and potentially lower production standards. Italy's move is just one manifestation of this wider protectionist sentiment, particularly strong in countries with significant domestic manufacturing.
Interesting to see that pushback. Okay, let's turn to culture now. A couple of big announcements involving Hollywood icons and a music superstar making a surprising career move.
Yes, some intriguing developments. First up, the global music phenomenon Adele is apparently set to make her feature film acting debut.
Adele, acting. In what kind of film?
She's been cast in an upcoming movie titled Cry to Heaven, and it's being directed by Tom Ford.
Tom Ford, the renowned fashion designer turned acclaimed film director. That's a high-profile project.
Absolutely. Ford directed A Single Man and Nocturnal Animals, both critically praised. He's expressed excitement about casting Adele, anticipating that her well-known raw emotional depth and incredibly compelling stage presence will translate powerfully into a dramatic role on screen. It's certainly a significant pivot for Adele, moving from the stage to cinema.
Definitely one to watch. And second, speaking of iconic figures, there's a teaser out for a sequel many people have waited decades for. The Devil Wears Prada 2.
Yes. Can you believe it? Meryl Streep is back as the formidable Miranda Priestley, and Anne Hathaway returns as the now presumably much more seasoned Andy Sachs.
What does the teaser reveal? Is it just nostalgia, or is there a new twist?
There seems to be a very juicy new twist involving the third main character from the original, Emily Charlton, played by Emily Blunt.
Miranda's perpetually stressed first assistant. What's happened to her?
Well, the teaser apparently shows that Emily is no longer Miranda's assistant. She has climbed the ranks and is now a powerful executive herself, working at a major global luxury conglomerate.
A powerful executive. So she's Miranda's equal now. Or maybe even rival.
That's the intriguing setup. Her company now reportedly wields significant advertising and financial influence over Miranda's magazine, Runway. So the power dynamics seem to have completely shifted. It promises a fascinating look at how the ruthless world of high fashion has evolved over the past 2 decades, who holds the power now, and what happens when these iconic characters clash again under very different circumstances. Should be fun.
Definitely sounds like fun. Okay, finally, let's wrap up with a few highlights from the world of sports. Tactical decisions in football, some controversy in cricket, and a significant move for gender equality in the Olympics. Starting with football, England's national team.
Yes, ahead of their crucial World Cup qualifying match against Serbia, there's been a surprise tactical decision regarding one of their biggest stars.
Who's that?
Jude Bellingham, the young superstar midfielder, is reportedly set to start the match on the bench.
Bellingham benched. He's usually one of the first names on the team sheet. Who's starting instead?
Morgan Rogers is expected to get the nod in that key attacking midfield role, the number 10 position, usually occupied by Bellingham.
Why the change? Is it about form, fitness, or tactics?
It seems to be primarily a strategic consideration by the coach, Gareth Southgate. It likely relates to managing player workload, perhaps rotating the squad to keep players fresh, maybe trying different tactical combinations against this specific opponent. It also speaks to the ongoing debate about England's squad depth, particularly in creative and attacking areas.
The perennial England debate. Do they have enough backup options, especially if their main talisman striker Harry Kane isn't available or firing?
Exactly. Relying heavily on Kane for goals has been a theme. This decision to start Rodgers over Bellingham fuels that discussion among fans and pundits about whether England has sufficient creative depth compared to some other top international teams or past England generations.
Always plenty to debate with England selections. Okay, moving to cricket. There's been a bit of a public spat involving the current England Test captain and a former captain-turned-pundit.
Yes, Ben Stokes, the current captain, made some comments recently where he seemed quite dismissive of criticism coming from certain former England players who are now prominent media commentators. He reportedly referred to some of them as has-beens.
Ouch. Has-beens. That's quite pointed. How was that received?
It drew a fairly sharp public response, notably from Michael Vaughan, himself a former England captain and now a very high-profile pundit. Vaughan didn't engage in a slanging match, but he stressed the importance of current players respecting the opinions and experiences of those who came before them, even if the criticism feels harsh or outdated.
So a reminder about respecting the history and the lineage.
Essentially, yes. Vaughan argued that former players often have valuable insights gained from their own time under pressure, and their perspectives shouldn't just be dismissed out of hand. It highlights that eternal tension that often exists between current athletes in the spotlight and the retired players who now critique them from the commentary box or newspaper columns. It's a dynamic you see across many sports.
Indeed. Lastly, a really positive and significant development regarding the Olympic Games and gender equality.
Yes, this concerns the scheduling for the upcoming Los Angeles 2028 Summer Olympics. The organizing committee has made a deliberate and strategic decision regarding one of the blue ribbon events of the Games, the 100-meter sprint finals.
The 100 meters, always one of the most watched events. What's the change?
They have decided to schedule the women's 100-meter final on the very first day of the athletics competition. The men's 100-meter final will then follow on the second day.
Traditionally, isn't the men's final often given the marquee slot, perhaps later in the schedule?
Often, yes. Or sometimes they're on the same day. But scheduling the women's final first, giving it that prime position on the opening day of track and field, is a very conscious and significant move.
What's the message behind that decision?
The clear message is about elevating the prominence and visibility of women's athletics. It ensures that one of the most exciting, highly anticipated events featuring female athletes take center stage right at the beginning of the athletics program, capturing maximum global attention. It's a concrete step towards achieving greater gender parity and recognition within the Olympic movement's premier sport. A commendable decision. Hashtag tag outro.
So we've covered an immense amount of ground again this week. From the truly cosmic scale, discovering these massive atmosphere-destroying CMEs 40 light years away that literally rewrite the rules for finding life.
Right down to our own planet, facing a solar flare powerful enough to potentially light up the skies over Texas and Florida. That connection between the distant universe and our immediate experience.
And we saw the incredible acceleration of human innovation, didn't we? Quantum communication leaps, AI generating code from just a vibe.
But immediately challenged by fundamental ethics and legality. AI models running smack into German copyright law for using song lyrics. That tension is everywhere.
We also saw deep political fault lines exposed. The U.S. government shutdown ending, but the core conflict over healthcare subsidies instantly reignited through legislative maneuvering.
And those incredibly tense military postures between the U.S. and Venezuela in the Caribbean. High stakes, signaling with real potential for miscalculation. That volatile mix of advanced science, technology, and really precarious governance feels like the defining feature of right now.
And amidst all that, we highlighted the profound fragility of human life in our institutions. The systemic failures in the UK's child protection system that led to the tragedy of Sarah Shrie's death.
Or the $100 million corruption scandal hitting the Ukrainian government just when they most need international trust and support. These vulnerabilities are stark.
They really are. And it all seems to lead us, inescapably perhaps, to one final, deeply provocative question that pulls together some of the most disturbing human elements we discussed today. We heard about the investigation into sniper tourism during the Bosnian War, people allegedly paying to shoot civilians for sport. And we heard the Human Rights Watch report detailing horrific torture and sexual violence against Venezuelan deportees in El Salvador's CECOT mega prison, a facility receiving some U.S. support.
Truly horrifying accounts of dehumanization.
So, considering those specific examples, the question we have to leave you with is this. How does the international community effectively enforce fundamental humanitarian laws? Things like the Geneva Conventions protecting civilians in wartime, or the UN Convention against torture when actions, whether they're carried out by state actors seemingly with impunity or by private citizens engaging in monstrous tourism, reveal such a deep, pervasive, and truly troubling desensitization to human life and suffering, especially in zones of conflict or crisis. Where does real accountability begin when the value of human life itself seems so easily discarded?
A profoundly difficult question. How do we uphold those laws when the underlying empathy seems eroded?
A question that forces us to confront accountability at every level, from governments down to individuals. Thank you, as always, for diving deep with us.
Until next time.
For enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.